In the west end of Toronto, along the long stretch of Dixon Road, the buildings rise in rows that all look the same to outsiders. Concrete towers with aging balconies and dim hallways. But inside those walls, a different system once operated, one that didn't follow the rules of the city above it, one built on speed, silence, and the constant movement of money. And at the center of that system were young men like Ziauddin Abdi, who didn't start as a kingpin, didn't begin with power, but grew into a structure that had already been running long before his name ever appeared on a police document. He came up in an environment where opportunity was limited and reputation carried weight, where respect wasn't given but earned through presence, reliability, and sometimes fear. And like many others around him, the first steps into the street economy didn't feel like a major decision. They felt gradual, almost natural, starting with small roles, running errands, making connections, learning who controlled what and how things moved without being seen. The buildings along Dixon weren't just places to live, they were ecosystems, each floor, each unit, each corner holding its own rhythm. And inside that rhythm, a network had formed, not chaotic, but structured with clear roles even if no one spoke them out loud. At the lowest level were the runners, the ones constantly moving, answering phones, stepping in and out of elevators, making quick exchanges that lasted seconds but repeated dozens of times a day. And above them were those who managed the flow, controlling supply within specific units, ensuring that product was always available, that money was collected, that nothing disrupted the pace. And above them again were the individuals who rarely appeared in those day-to-day movements, but whose decisions shaped everything. The ones who determined pricing, supply routes, and who could operate within the territory. Somewhere within that layered structure, Abdi found his place, not at the very top, but not at the bottom either, positioned in a way that gave him access, responsibility, and exposure to how the entire system functioned. The product moved consistently, cocaine and crack forming the backbone of the operation, packaged in small quantities, ready to be distributed at any hour because the demand never really stopped. It only shifted throughout the day, and the phones were central to everything. Simple devices that carried coded messages, short conversations that sounded meaningless to anyone listening without context. But within the network, every phrase had purpose, every call connected to a transaction, every number tied to a role. Money flowed back through the same channels, collected, counted, moved again, rarely staying in one place for long because holding cash was risk, and risk had to be minimized at all times. From the outside, it could have looked disorganized, people moving in and out of buildings at all hours, cars pulling up briefly and leaving just as quickly, but inside there was order, a system that relied on repetition and trust in that environment was fragile, built over time, but always under pressure, because everyone understood what was at stake, not just money, but freedom, reputation, and survival within a world that did not forgive mistakes easily. What the network did not see clearly, at least not at first, was how visible that consistency made them to those watching from a different angle, because patterns, no matter how carefully maintained, begin to stand out when observed long enough. And it started with small encounters, individual arrests that on their own seemed minor, quantities too small to suggest anything beyond street-level dealing, but the same names, the same locations, the same phone numbers began to appear again and again. And for investigators, repetition is never ignored. The operation that would later be known as Project Traveler did not begin with a single dramatic breakthrough. It began with patience, with officers collecting fragments of information, building connections between incidents that at first seemed unrelated, mapping out a network that revealed itself slowly, piece by piece, until the outlines of something much larger became impossible to dismiss. Surveillance intensified, unmarked vehicles positioned near buildings along Dixon Road, watching entrances, noting movements, identifying who came and went, how often, and in what patterns, and over time, those observations turned into a clearer understanding of how the system operated. Wiretaps became the turning point. point, because once communication was captured, the hidden structure started to speak, not directly, not in clear language, but through repetition, through coded phrases that aligned with observed behavior, through timing that matched known activity, and suddenly conversations that once sounded ordinary carried meaning, revealing how orders were passed, how supply was requested, how coordination happened across different parts of the network. For individuals like Abdi, who operated within that communication flow, every call became a piece of evidence, every interaction a thread that investigators could follow deeper into the system. Inside the network, life continued as it always had, because from within, it is difficult to see the full scope of what is happening around you. The focus remains on immediate tasks, on maintaining position, on ensuring that nothing disrupts the flow of money, and yet pressure was building, not just from outside, but internally, as disputes emerged, as questions of loyalty surfaced, as the constant need to maintain control began to strain relationships. Success brought attention, even if it was unwanted, and attention created tension, and tension revealed weaknesses that had always been there but were easier to ignore when everything was running smoothly. As the investigation reached its final stages, the evidence had grown extensive, connecting individuals across multiple locations, linking street-level activity to higher-level coordination, and when the decision was made to act, it was executed with precision. Early morning raids carried out simultaneously across dozens of locations, leaving no time for warnings to spread, no opportunity for the network to adapt or respond. Doors were breached, units secured, and inside investigators found exactly what they had been building toward for months. Drugs packaged for distribution, cash stored in hidden compartments, phones containing the very communications that had been monitored, all of it confirming the existence of a structured operation far beyond what any single arrest could have revealed. Abdi was among those taken into custody, one of many names that would appear in reports and headlines, but each name represented a role within a larger system. And with those arrests, the network that had operated so consistently along Dixon Road was effectively dismantled. Its structure exposed, its operations disrupted, at least for a time. The scale of Project Traveler became clear in the aftermath. Dozens of individuals charged, hundreds of counts laid, significant quantities of drugs and firearms seized, and for the public it was presented as a major victory against organized crime, a clear example of law enforcement breaking through a dangerous network. But the reality within the streets of Toronto is more complex, because while one network can be dismantled, the conditions that allowed it to exist do not disappear overnight. The demand remains, the environment remains, and new individuals step into roles that have been vacated, sometimes learning from what came before, sometimes repeating the same patterns without realizing it. The buildings along Dixon Road did not change their appearance after the raids. The hallways remained the same, the routines of everyday life continued, but the memory of what had been uncovered lingered, a reminder of how deeply embedded such systems can become within a community. For someone like Ziauddin Abdi, the story is not just about involvement in a criminal network, but about the path that leads into it, the gradual movement from the edges of the system into its core. The normalization of activities that from the outside seem extreme but from within feel routine, and the eventual moment when that entire structure collapses under the weight of sustained observation and investigation. It is a story shaped by environment, by choices, by opportunity and limitation, and by the constant tension between visibility and concealment that defines street-level organized crime. Project Traveler did not end the drug trade along Dixon Road or anywhere else in the city, but it revealed how such networks operate, how they grow, how they maintain control, and how they can be dismantled when enough time, resources, and coordination are applied. And in that sense, it stands as both a conclusion and a continuation, the end of one chapter and the beginning of another in a cycle that continues to play out across different neighborhoods, different names, and different groups. groups, all operating under the same fundamental reality that no matter how structured, how disciplined, or how careful a network becomes, the patterns it creates can eventually be seen, understood, and broken.